This morning's scripture is from Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1, beginning at verse 29. Mark 1:29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons. And the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. One of the pieces that I read in preparing to speak on this was clearly written before 2020 or 2021, because the author asks us to imagine that a doctor has come up with a cure for HIV and is offering it for free. And he asks us to imagine how people would crowd that doctor's office for treatment. Well, we don't have to imagine. For a year now, we've been living with the awareness of this virus, one about which we knew very little a year ago. And sometimes our response has brought us together. And sometimes our response has driven us apart, set us at odds with each other. Now in record time, we have vaccines, and now we have the problem of scheduling vaccines and prioritizing vaccines. My father and stepmother have 4 children, working on trying to find them a vaccine. It's an ongoing thing. We read just this week about people from Louisiana who are scheduling themselves for vaccines in Mississippi. And of course our thought is, those are our vaccines. They're allocated to us. They shouldn't be coming from Louisiana to get our vaccines. And then on the other hand, we think, well, the virus doesn't really care what side of an imaginary line you live on. or what side of a big river you live on. We are continuing to deal with this. And it's scary. But it's not new. It's new in our experience. But it's not new. My aunt was born in 1916, 19 years before my father was born. And in 1918, when she was 2, there was the previous worldwide pandemic, a flu pandemic, one that was particularly deadly then to the young and healthy. And she was one of those who caught it and succumbed to it. My grandmother spent the rest of her life sure that death, disease, and destruction was right around the corner. She collected stories about sudden and unexpected death. She told me a story about a man who was driving down the road and a stray piece of gravel was kicked up by the vehicle in front of him, and the gravel came right through his windshield and right between his eyes and killed him, which was quite a story. Though later on my father took me aside and said, you know, that happened 50 years ago. That was before they had shatterproof glass for windshields. But it was a real story to her. It was a real experience. She knew about it. And for most of human history, that's what we have lived with. I read about Babe Ruth. His birthday was sometime last week. Babe Ruth's mother gave birth to 8 children, and only 2 of them lived to adulthood. Babe and one of his sisters. That was common. It certainly was common in the time of Jesus. Peter's mother-in-law has a fever. That's all they could say about it. She had a fever. People had fevers. Sometimes they survived. Sometimes they didn't. Jesus sees her with a fever and lifts her up and restores her health. Word has gotten around. Word has gotten around about earlier in the day when Jesus was teaching in the synagogue, teaching as one with authority, and something got stirred up. A man with an unclean spirit gets up and begins shouting at him and proclaiming Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, and Jesus tells him to be quiet. He responds to the man's need, and the man is freed. And in the same way, Peter's mother-in-law is freed from her fever, and people come from all around with diseases of body and spirit, and there was no distinction. We make a distinction maybe between body and spirit, or body and soul, but they didn't make a distinction. You were ill with an unclean spirit, you were ill with an illness, with a physical illness. Jesus responds to all of them. And after a full day and full evening, he withdraws. He goes to pray. He has his own need to process all of this. What does this mean? What should I do? What am I? My preaching seems to stir up unclean spirits. What do I do? What is it? We know that Jesus is Son of God, the Messiah. Mark tells us at the beginning. The disciples don't know, and he's silencing those who are telling on him. Peter has a good idea. Simon has a good idea. Why don't we set up a healing center here in Capernaum? People can come from all over. But Jesus says we need to go and preach. We need to go and teach in other towns. We don't need to just stay in one place. We need to go preach and teach in other towns. And things will get stirred up. There will be more ill. There will be more illness. There'll be more unclean spirits. And we will respond to those. Teaching and healing are two sides of the same ministry. We are soul and spirit. We are soul and body. When Jesus comes among us, things don't stay the same. Things get stirred up. But that's good news. It means that healing, that restoration is at hand.